Hi, I'm Alan Gibson. This is Matthew O'Malia. We're on the site of the geologic prototype home in Belfast, Maine. We are a design-build collaboration. We have in the process here a super energy efficient 1,500 square foot home that we are going to be pouring concrete for today.
The home's a really unique revolutionary design for residential construction because instead of just building a slightly better home and shell, we're building a home that uses 90% less energy for the space heating. And to do that, it takes a few unique details and construction methods to achieve that thermal performance. And it also takes a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking to keep that at a price which is affordable for everyone to have for their own home. So what we'll show you today is some of the details and some of the thinking that has gone into making the project both super energy efficient and also affordable. Because we think the two are coupled in order to afford a house like this in the first place, but also to afford to heat it in the future. So when we go through, there's insulation details and levels that most people are probably pretty unfamiliar with, and in incorporating them into the project, it takes special consideration and care in the sequencing and the method of construction. So we'll give you a little bit of a tour and a close-up of how we're going to achieve this. So to begin with, we have to build, like in any good building, a good foundation. And what we're doing in this prototype to save costs and also provide the energy performance is to do a slab-on-grade foundation, which you see the preparation for here. On most footings, the concrete bears directly on compacted gravel or on excavated dirt. In our case, we're making a compacted gravel base, and then we cast a flowable fill, which is a sand and concrete mixture that's highly aerated that flows around like water and almost self-leveling. We need that because on top of that we're going to put a base of high density insulation which our footings will bear on. The difference between this and conventional construction is then with this insulation, we have a complete thermal and moisture break from the concrete and the footing. So essentially, the entire house will be isolated from the ground and the water, which dramatically improves the thermal performance. In a few minutes, we're going to have a concrete truck come and pour all of these footings for us. These footings are unique. They're ICF footing material, which is an insulated concrete form. It's a prefabricated insulated form with clipped together sections, and then the rebar is held in place by these clipped together sections. Typically a footing is this width and walls are 8 to 10 inches. In our case, because we're doing a slab on grade foundation, we'll just pour a footing with this rebar and we'll build our walls directly on top. Now most people understand in a cold climate like Maine, you need to get below the frost depth so the footings are stable and they don't heave. In our case, we're using this insulation on the exterior here going out 2 feet, which insulates the ground, holding the warmth of the ground in during the winter months. We backfill the dirt over top of this, and that foam here is the same as building essentially the 4.5 feet that we would need for frost protection. These footings, once they're cast, will have a timber frame installed on top of them, which will essentially be the structure of our house. In a nutshell, when we're building our foundation, we're trying to be efficient with every step of the way. With our compacted gravel, our flowable fill, these large panels of insulation, and the foundation formwork, all simple and quickly done, controlling the costs and improving energy performance. So what you see here is the entrance into the building with the utilities, the water line. This is electric cable for lightning strike, and the sewer outflow pipe. And in addition to that, we have these lines right here which are heat sensing probes. And we have, as you can see, we have one that will go under the slab, which hooks into a unit which monitors the temperatures under the slab. And we also have one that's going to the septic area where we're monitoring temperatures around there. The reason that we're so interested in the temperatures is we do a lot of computer modeling to verify the energy performance of the building. In doing that, we make assumptions. What's the temperature of the ground so we can verify the heat loss. Another thing that we're doing is we know in terms of geothermal energy, the Earth always has energy once you get below 5 feet. So these lines right here, which are PEX tubing, have been run up into the building, and is what we're going to use these for. Is this line runs under the building with the water trench, which is buried at 5 feet, and we're going to be collecting the geothermal energy and using it as a preheat system for our heat recovery ventilation later in the house. When we build the house, we'll provide heat recovery ventilation for a healthy indoor air environment, and we'll use the Earth's heat to temper that incoming air from the exterior in the wintertime. In the wintertime, we can expect it to get down, as we all know, into Maine, into 0 degrees, and that incoming air can oftentimes freeze up the heat recovery ventilation unit. So using these tubes, we can use the Earth's heat to warm the temperature of the incoming exterior air from 0 degrees to about 50 degrees. In doing that, we substantially increase the performance of the heat recovery ventilation, which in the long run has a strong effect in the overall energy performance of the building. Now, what we're doing in this project is a little bit strange and a little bit unique. One of these geothermal loops is, as I said, going with the water line in a conventional sense. This loop, however, is a little bit unusual. Now, keep in mind, it's a closed water loop. We don't exchange any water in here. It's just the same water running through this loop, providing the preheat. But you'll find that when we find the outfall of this pipe and you look at the sewer line, they both come outside the building, and they're coiled right here. This line right here, which is adjacent to the sewer line, will go to the septic tank, which will be located about 15 feet from the building. And we're going to run this tube inside the septic tank, which sounds a little gross, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of warm water exiting the building, going into the septic tank every single day, and it's a fantastic opportunity to capture that little bit of extra heat, which will cut in the long-term energy performance of the building quite substantially. So we're not afraid to run this closed loop in the septic tank if we're going to be able to get the energy out of it. And to know what kind of energy we'll be able to get out of it, we have these probes as well, which are run so we can always verify the temperatures of what we expect to see and what we actually see on site. So here we are basically standing inside the house. As you can see, the footings that we're going to cast today are going to make a bit of a basin in here. Inside of this basin has a lot of advantages for us because it's totally isolated with our insulation from the cold exterior. So what we'll do here is we're going to add another layer of insulation, believe it or not. So we will have at these interior spaces a total of 8 inches of rigid insulation. Most people think that's crazy, but when you run the numbers, it makes sense. It's a cost-effective thing to do because the energy you save here for the cost of the materials is a long-term benefit and pays back very quickly. So we're going to add rigid insulation, and underneath that rigid insulation, a very important thing happens. We're going to add a layer of plastic, which becomes a vapor barrier to the house. The reason we have the vapor barrier is twofold. One is for vapor for moisture control, but also air infiltration. And we'll take that vapor barrier and air barrier and run it up and attach it to all the walls and seal all the walls, because what's critical in the high-performance house is to control the unintended airflow or infiltration in and out of the house. It's important to make sure that we don't get any cold air from the exterior that's unwanted and not controlled. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a heat recovery ventilation system to provide the healthy indoor air environment. So once we've installed the air and vapor barrier and the rigid insulation to protect that, we're going to fill this entire area inside the footing with gravel, which allows us to run all our plumbing lines underneath the concrete slab. Eventually, we'll pour a concrete slab on here, which will either be the finished surface, or we can install a wood floor or a cork floor or other flooring types on top of that, depending on what the client chooses. In this case, we're going to be casting a concrete slab that has a polished finish, which is very lovely, and it's exposed, and the benefit of that is all the sun that comes through the south windows will be collected in that as a thermal sink for the building, essentially a flywheel of sorts for the solar gain that we get. All right, well, here comes the concrete. This is the exciting part. You get one chance to do concrete right. So they're going to pour this in, 3,000 psi, and they're going to move it around and level it to the top of these forms. We use concrete sparingly because it takes a lot of energy to make that stuff. So in our case, we're going to use just all that we need for the proper bearing and structural capacity of the house.